silence. It is the language that predates all language, the primordial voice of creation, the sound that exists before a single word is ever spoken. If you wish to understand the psyche, if you wish to penetrate the inner architecture of the soul, you must first confront the terrible weight of silence. Most people fear silence not because it is empty, but because it is full. It contains the echoes of what we avoid, the shadow truths we dare not articulate. The silence within you is not void, it is a mirror. And when you face that mirror, it shows you who you are without your masks. When I speak of silence as a weapon, I do not speak of cruelty in the ordinary sense. This is not about withholding words as a tactic of manipulation or a childish refusal to engage. No, I speak of the silence that comes from power, the silence that arises when the conscious mind chooses not to fill the void with noise, excuses, or leisure. Silence is brutal because it strips away illusions. It is the scalpel that cuts through the layers of pretense, through the persona you wear, like a second skin. It leaves you exposed, and it leaves others exposed, because there is nowhere to hide when silence is present. Think of how we live, surrounded by words and endless chatter. We are drowning in communication, and yet very little of it is true. People speak not to convey truth, but to hide it. They speak to fill the space that might otherwise reveal their emptiness. But when you are silent, you disrupt that game. You are no longer participating in the collective delusion that words can save us from facing ourselves. Silence is an archetype, a force older than humanity, and when you wield it, you step into the role of the sage, the witness, the seer. You become the one who does not need to defend, explain, or justify, and that unsettles those who are trapped in the need for constant validation. Silence can feel like a punishment to those who fear their own inner voices. When you refuse to fill the air with answers, others project onto you their anxieties, their insecurities, their need to be seen. But that projection is a gift. If you know how to observe it, it shows you what is unresolved within them. It reveals the shadows they are carrying but do not dare to face. In this way, silence is not just an act, it is a diagnostic tool, a method of deep psychological alchemy. You hold a mirror and they cannot bear to look. I remember in my own clinical work, there were patients who would come to me desperate for answers. They believed that therapy was about me filling the space with interpretations and solutions, but I discovered, often to their discomfort, that the most transformative moments came, not when I spoke, but when I said nothing at all. My silence was not absence. It was presence intense, watchful, and open. In that silence, they began to hear themselves. They began to feel the weight of the words they were avoiding. And in that moment, something within them would shift. Silence forced them to confront what they had buried. The brutal aspect of silence is that it does not care for comfort. It is like the deep black of the unconscious. You cannot control it. You can only surrender to it. The unconscious speaks in symbols, dreams, and images. Silence is its natural language When you enter silence, you step out of the realm of ego and into the realm of the self, the totality of who you are, both light and dark. But most of us live in fear of this totality. We cling to the persona, the social mask, because it allows us to pretend that we are simple, rational beings. We do not want to acknowledge that within us exists the shadow, the wild, chaotic, irrational force that we have disowned. Silence, however, does not lie. In silence, the shadow rises like a ghost from the depths, demanding recognition. Imagine you are in a conversation with someone who has hurt you. Your instinct may be to argue, to defend, to prove your point. Words, however, are often futile when the other person is not ready to hear silence. On the other hand, is unassailable. It cannot be twisted. It cannot be denied. When you stand in silence, you are not withdrawing. You are standing in the power of presence. Your silence speaks, it says. I will not feed the fire of your unconsciousness. I will not give you the fuel of my reaction. It is a stance of sovereignty, but make no mistake, this kind of silence is not passive. It is an active engagement with the deepest forces of the psyche. It requires courage to hold silence, especially when every fiber of your ego screams to speak, to be right, to be understood. To hold silence is to enter into communion with something larger than the small self. It is to stand at the threshold of the archetypal, and when you do this, others feel it. They may not understand it intellectually, but they sense it. Your silence unsettles them because it forces them to face themselves. Silence is also brutal. In another sense, it destroys illusions in your own life. When you retreat into silence, when you deliberately strip away the distractions of noise and chatter, you will encounter the raw truth of your own being. Many people cannot sit alone in a quiet room without reaching for a phone or turning on the television. They fear the encounter with the unknown within. They fear the voice that speaks from the unconscious, the voice they have ignored for years. But if you can endure that encounter, you will find a source of power that words can never give you. You will find that silence is not empty, it is full of meaning, full of the whispers of the self, full of the guidance you have been too busy to hear. Consider the dream. Dreams are born out of silence. When you sleep, you enter into that primal silence of the unconscious, and from it arise the images that seek to guide you. The dream does not explain itself with words. It speaks in symbols, in strange and mysterious narratives that bypass the rational mind. To understand your dreams, you must learn to listen to silence, to wait, to feel, rather than to think. Silence is the womb of all insight. It is from silence that the great revelations come. All true wisdom is born not from noise, but from stillness. The weapon of silence becomes most potent when you understand its spiritual dimension. In every great mystical tradition, silence is revered as a doorway to the divine. The mystics of every culture have known that God, the self, the absolute, it is not found in the shouting of the marketplace, but in the quiet of the heart. When you learn to be silent, truly silent, you align yourself with that which is beyond the ego. You step into the archetype of the hermit, the one who retreats into the cave, not to escape the world, but to see it more clearly in silence. The veil between the conscious and unconscious thins, and you begin to perceive the deeper currents that shape your life. Yet we live in an age that fears silence more than ever. We fill every moment with sound, with notifications, with distractions. We no longer know how to listen to ourselves, to others, to the world. And because of this, we are lost. We have forgotten that silence is not the enemy of connection, but its foundation. Only in silence can you truly hear another person. Only in silence can you truly hear yourself. And only in silence can you hear the whisper of the divine. To wield silence as a weapon, then, is not to harm others, but to awaken them. It is to refuse to participate in the endless noise that keeps them asleep. It is to hold a space where truth can emerge, unfiltered, rough, and undeniable. This requires discipline. It requires the ability to withstand the discomfort of not filling the void. It requires the humility to let silence do its work, which is often slow, subtle, and invisible. There is a story that comes to mind, one that is not mine, but that I have often pondered. A man once went to a great master seeking wisdom. He asked question after question, but the master said nothing. The man grew impatient, demanding answers, and still the master remained silent. Finally, in his frustration, the man shouted, "Why will you not speak to me?" The master smiled gently and said, "Because you are not yet ready to hear. Silence is not the absence of teaching, it is the deepest form of teaching. It is the teacher that does not impose, that does not spoon feed, but that allows the student to find his own inner voice. There is a strange paradox in silence. It is both gentle and ruthless. It does not shout, yet it crushes the illusions we have spent years constructing. It forces us to see the cracks in our own psyche. When you choose silence in moments of conflict, people will often interpret it as judgment or indifference or even disdain. But the truth is, silence is more profound than any judgment could be. It does not accuse, it simply reflects. And in that reflection, others are forced to confront their own conscience. This is why silence can be felt as a brutal weapon, because it bypasses the mind's defenses and goes directly to the soul. Do you notice how uncomfortable people become when silence lingers in a room? In a conversation, if you do not rush to fill every pause with words, the other person begins to reveal themselves. They scramble to fill the void, often exposing the very truth they were trying to conceal. In that sense, silence is not empty space. It is an amplifier. It magnifies what lies beneath. It exposes insecurities, fears, and unspoken truths. This is why, as a therapist, I learned that silence often speaks louder than the most precise interpretation. A single moment of shared silence with a patient could lead to a breakthrough that no words could have achieved. Silence is a mirror of the unconscious. Just as a still lake reflects the sky, silence reflects the deeper layers of the psyche, but the reflection is not always pleasant to behold. Most people are terrified of what they might see if they allow the noise to stop. They fear the darkness within, the unintegrated shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is simply the part of you that has been exiled, ignored, or rejected. It holds the emotions you deemed unacceptable, the desires you buried, the wounds you never healed. Silence invites these forgotten parts to emerge, and when they do, you feel naked, vulnerable, perhaps even broken, but this is not the end. It is the beginning of wholeness. You cannot integrate what you will not face. Silence forces you to face it. When you sit with silence, you will begin to hear the whispers of the inner child, the voice of the part of you that was silenced long ago. Perhaps you will hear the voice of anger you suppressed, or the grief you denied. These voices come not to torment you, but to remind you that they are still part of you. Healing begins when you listen without fear. This is why silence is brutal. It will strip you down to the core, revealing everything you have been running from. But once the storm passes, silence also becomes the ground on which you can rebuild. Silence, when embraced, transforms into strength. You begin to realize that not every question demands an immediate answer. Not every attack requires a response. Not every wound needs to be explained. There is a kind of sovereignty in knowing that your silence can hold more power than any argument. Think of the wise elders in ancient tribes who would listen for hours, speaking only when necessary. Their words carried weight precisely because they emerged from silence. Silence gave their words authority. Today, we throw words around carelessly, like arrows without targets. But silence teaches you to aim before you release. It teaches you that true speech arises only after you have truly listened. In relationships, silence can cut deeper than anger. Anger is noisy. Il demande attention. But silence speaks from a deeper place. When you stop speaking to someone who has wronged you, it can shake them to their core. Not because you are punishing them, but because silence denies them the energy they were feeding on. Toxic people thrive on reaction. They want your words, your emotions, your chaos. Silence deprives them of that nourishment. It leaves them alone with themselves, which is often the most terrifying place to be. This is why silence is not just a shield, it is a sword. It can sever the cords that bind you to destructive dynamics. But you must be careful with this sword. Silence, when used unconsciously, can become a weapon of cruelty. It can turn into emotional withdrawal or passive aggression through silence. The kind I speak of is not about avoidance or punishment. It is about clarity. It is about choosing not to engage with what is false. It is about preserving your energy for what truly matters. When silence comes from love, it does not harm. It simply creates space. And in that space, the truth is revealed. There is an archetype I often see in dreams, the silent sage. This figure appears as an old man or woman sitting alone on a mountain, saying nothing. They do not give answers, but their presence radiates wisdom. You know that if you sit long enough with them, the answers you seek will arise from within you. This is the power of silence. It connects you to your inner sage. The part of you that already knows, we search endlessly for answers outside ourselves, forgetting that the deepest truths cannot be spoken. They can only be realized in silence. Dreams themselves are fragments of this silent wisdom. They do not explain themselves. They simply present images: a dark forest, a snake, a child crying. All of these are messages from the unconscious. To decode them, you must become silent within. You must learn to feel what the dream evokes rather than rushing to label it. The unconscious does not speak English or German or French. It speaks in the language of silence and symbol. And when you honor that language, your life begins to unfold in deeper harmony. Silence is also where creativity is born. Every great work of art, every profound discovery begins in silence. The artist stares at the empty canvas. The musician sits before the untouched instrument. The philosopher walks alone at night. It is in the stillness of that waiting that inspiration arrives. We often think that creativity is about constant action. But the truth is, it is about listening. The best ideas come when we stop forcing them, when we surrender to the silence and allow something greater than ourselves to speak through us. The brutality of silence lies in its demand for authenticity. In silence, you cannot hide behind small talk or clever arguments. You cannot distract yourself with endless noise. You must meet yourself as you are. And for many, this is unbearable. We build entire lives designed to avoid silence. We keep ourselves busy, constantly moving, constantly consuming information. Why? Because we are afraid of the questions that silence might ask. Who are you, really, when no one is watching? What do you truly desire? What are you running from? These are the questions. Silence, whispers. And they can shake you to your core. But do not fear these questions. They are not meant to destroy you, but to free you. When you finally allow yourself to be silent, you begin to hear the answers you have been seeking all along. You begin to feel the presence of something vast and eternal within you, the self, the divine spark, the center that does not change. Silence reveals that you are not your thoughts, not your roles, not your fears. You are something far deeper, something that cannot be spoken, only experienced. I have seen people transformed simply by spending time in silence, not a few minutes, but days, weeks, even months. In the beginning, they struggle, their minds race, their bodies fidget, their egos protest, but gradually the noise subsides. The mind becomes like a still pond. And in that stillness, they see themselves clearly for the first time. They see the patterns that have ruled their lives. They see the wounds they have carried. and they see the light that has always been there, hidden beneath the noise. When you choose to embrace silence, you step into a sacred space where the boundaries between the conscious and the unconscious begin to dissolve. It is like entering a temple without walls, a place where the eternal resides. Most people imagine silence as a passive state, as though nothing is happening in its depth. But silence is alive. It is teeming with movements beneath the surface, like the unseen currents of the ocean. It is in silence that the archetypes awaken the primordial patterns that shape our lives and stories. The hero, the shadow, the mother, the trickster. These forces reveal themselves not in the noise of daily chatter, but in the quiet moments when you dare to turn inward. I recall how many of my patients would recoil when asked to sit with silence. They would fidget, their faces contorting with discomfort, as if silence itself were an accusation. And in truth, silence does accuse, though not in words. It accuses us of forgetting who we are. It reminds us of the life unlived, the potential abandoned. This is why silence feels brutal, because it pierces through our well-constructed defenses and shows us what we have ignored. And yet, so those who dare to endure this confrontation emerge transformed. They discover that silence is not the enemy, but the ally. It is a teacher who refuses to flatter you, the guide who will not let you rest until you confront the truth. Silence in relationships can reveal everything that words try to conceal. In a world intoxicated with constant talking, the one who chooses silence often becomes the most powerful presence in the room. Imagine standing before someone who no longer reacts to your chaos, who no longer entertains your false narratives. That silence is like a mirror reflecting your inner turmoil. It is not aggressive, yet it is unyielding, and often it speaks more than words ever could. In conflicts, silence can shift the dynamic entirely. It refuses to engage with the lower energies of anger or pettiness. It says, I see you, but I do not accept your game. Silence is both shield and sword. It protects your inner peace and simultaneously cuts through illusions. To wield silence with grace is to know the difference between withdrawal and wisdom. Silence that comes from fear or resentment is brittle. It is a wall built to shut others out. But silence that arises from clarity is different. It is not about hiding, but about seeing more deeply. It is about standing so firmly in your truth that words become unnecessary. This kind of silence does not wound, it liberates. It creates space for the real conversation to begin, not the one between two egos, but the one between two souls. Think of the times in your life when someone's silence unsettled you more than their words. Perhaps you were waiting for a response that never came, or you stood before someone whose silence carried an almost unbearable weight. That weight is the energy of the unspoken. It is the raw, unmediated presence of the moment. Words often dilute this presence, but silence holds it intact. In that moment, you are confronted not by the other person's voice, but by your own reflection in their stillness. There is also a silence within nature that speaks with a power beyond language. go to a forest at dawn or stand before a mountain at sunset, and you will feel it, the profound silence that is not the absence of sound but the fullness of presence. This silence is the voice of eternity. It humbles you, reminding you of your smallness, but also of your connection to everything. In that silence, you begin to understand that your personal dramas are but ripples on the surface of an infinite ocean. The deeper you sink into this silence, the more you begin to hear a greater rhythm, the heartbeat of existence itself. Silence is also the realm of the feminine archetype, the Great Mother, the source of all creation. In the womb, life grows in silence. Seeds break open in silence. Transformation happens not in the noise, but in the quiet, unseen spaces. The psyche too requires such silence to renew itself. When you give yourself the gift of silence, you allow the unconscious to work its magic. Insights bubble up, dreams become vivid, and intuition sharpens. You begin to see patterns in your life that were invisible before because you were too busy talking, too busy filling every gap with sound. In my studies of the collective unconscious, I have seen how societies fear silence. They equate it with weakness, with absence, with death. But the opposite is true. Silence is not death. It is gestation. It is the pregnant pause before a new creation is born. When you choose silence, you are not retreating, you are incubating something powerful. And when the time comes to speak, your words will carry the weight of that silence. They will be infused with the depth and clarity that only silence can give. Let us consider the dream world again, for it is the closest mirror of the unconscious. Dreams are filled with moments of silence, spaces between events, scenes where nothing is said, but everything is felt. These silences are not empty. They are the carriers of meaning. In a dream, a single silent gaze can hold the power of 1,000 words. The same is true in life. A look, a pause, a breath held in silence can speak volumes. Silence is the language of the soul. It is subtle, but it is also uncompromising. When you use silence consciously, you begin to see how much of life is wasted on meaningless noise. You learn to discern which words are necessary and which are merely a distraction. You realize that much of what we call communication is simply a defense against intimacy. We speak to avoid truly seeing each other. But in silence, there is no escape. You are present, you are vulnerable, and in that vulnerability, true connection becomes possible. Silence strips away the armor of words, leaving only the raw essence of being. In moments of personal struggle, silence can be the most powerful ally. When you are tempted to lash out, to justify yourself, to prove your worth, try silence instead. Not as a form of suppression, but as a form of strength. Breathe into the silence and feel its weight. In that space, you will find the clarity that anger cannot give you. You will see that your power does not come from dominating others with words, but from standing rooted in your own truth. Silence can also be a form of resistance in a world that demands constant noise, constant opinions, constant declarations, choosing silence is an act of rebellion. It says, I do not need to perform for you. I do not need to prove myself in this endless marketplace of voices. Silence reclaims your autonomy. It reminds you that you are not obligated to explain yourself to anyone. Your life is not a debate that needs to be won. Your truth is your truth, whether or not anyone else hears it. When I reflect on the essence of silence, I see it as a crucible of transformation. It is the furnace where the false layers of the ego are burned away, leaving only the gold of the authentic self. This is why silence feels so unbearable for those who are still clinging to their masks, because it has the power to melt everything that is not real. The ego thrives on words, on stories, on the endless repetition of its identity, but silence undermines all of that. It whispers, who are you when the story stops? Who are you when the voices fall quiet? This question alone can unravel an entire life built on illusions, and yet it is precisely this unraveling that leads to awakening. When you stop talking long enough to listen, you discover that there is a presence within you that is far greater than the persona you have built. It is not bound by your fears, your history, or even your name. It simply is. Silence reveals this presence. It is like peeling back the layers of noise that have suffocated the truth of who you are. And when you glimpse this truth, even for a moment, you begin to understand why silence is not a void but a force, perhaps the most powerful force you will ever wield. Think about the last time you sat alone in silence, without a phone, without music, without anything to distract you. What did you feel? For many, the first sensations are discomfort, anxiety, even panic. But beneath those layers of resistance, there is something else, something that feels both terrifying and liberating. It is the raw encounter with your own consciousness. It is like looking into an infinite mirror. This is why silence feels so brutal. It strips away every distraction until you are left with nothing but yourself. And yet, this nothing is the doorway to everything. In silence, you begin to perceive the subtle movements of your psyche. You notice the patterns of thought that rise and fall like waves. You hear the whispers of intuition that are usually drowned out by noise. You feel the presence of archetypes moving through you, shaping your perceptions and your dreams. Silence connects you to the collective unconscious, the vast ocean of symbols and stories that belong not just to you, but to all humanity. In silence, you are no longer a separate individual. You are part of something greater, something timeless. In this way, silence can also become an act of healing. So many of our wounds are caused by words that were spoken carelessly, words that were never spoken at all. We carry these wounds like invisible scars, but silence has a way of softening them. It is in the quiet moments that we can finally hear the voice of the inner healer. This voice does not speak in language. It speaks in feelings, in images, in sudden moments of clarity. Healing does not come from more noise, more analysis, more explanations. It comes from listening deeply to what is already there, waiting to be acknowledged. Silence also teaches us about boundaries. When you stop speaking, when you stop trying to please or explain yourself, you begin to feel the edges of your own being. You realize where you end and where others begin. This is why silence is such a powerful weapon in relationships. It clarifies everything. When you refuse to engage in meaningless arguments, when you stand quietly in your truth, the dynamic shifts. The other person can no longer control you with their chaos. They must face themselves, and that is often the most difficult thing for them to do. In this way, your silence becomes a mirror in which they see their own shadows. There is something profoundly spiritual about this act. In many mystical traditions, silence is considered the highest form of prayer. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of deep listening. When you enter this kind of silence, you are not trying to control or manipulate anything. You are simply present, open to whatever arises. It is in this openness that the divine can be felt. Words, no matter how beautiful, are illimited. They are like fingers pointing to the moon. They can never be the moon itself. Silence, however, is the moonlight. It is the direct experience of that which cannot be spoken. To wield silence as a weapon, you must first understand it as a friend. You cannot use silence to hurt others without also hurting yourself. True silence is not about dominance or punishment. It is about alignment. It is about aligning with the deeper truth that lies beyond words. When you come from this place, your silence is not heavy or cold. It is alive, full of presence, and others can feel it. They may not understand it, but they will be moved by it. They will sense that you are connected to something beyond the ordinary mind. Consider the archetype of the warrior. A true warrior does not need to boast or shout. Their presence alone is enough to command respect. In the same way, silence is the mark of inner strength. When you can sit in silence without fear, you become untouchable. No argument can shake you. No insult can wound you, because you are rooted in something deeper than the shifting sands of opinion. Silence is not weakness. It is the ultimate demonstration of power, but it is a power that does not need to prove itself. As we explore the deeper dimensions of silence, it is important to remember that it is not about withdrawal from life. Silence is not meant to cut you off from others, but to connect you more deeply. When you cultivate inner silence, you become a better listener. You begin to hear the nuances in people's voices, the emotions beneath their words, the unspoken truths they are carrying. You develop a kind of psychic sensitivity, an ability to read the energy in a room without anyone saying a word. This is not magic. It is simply what happens when the mind is quiet enough to perceive what is always there. Silence also deepens your relationship with time. In our noisy, hurried world, we are constantly rushing, constantly filling every moment with something. But when you sit in silence, time slows down. You begin to feel its texture, in that you realize that life is not a race, but a series of unfolding moments, each one rich with meaning. If you only stop long enough to notice, this awareness brings a profound peace, a sense of being rooted in the eternal present. And yet, Silence is not always peaceful. Sometimes it is fierce. Sometimes it drags you into the depths of your own darkness. But even this is a gift. The shadow must be faced if you are to become whole. Silence is the doorway to this confrontation. It will show you the parts of yourself you have tried to escape: the anger, the grief, the loneliness. But once you face these shadows, they lose their power over you. They become integrated, transformed into sources of strength. In this way, silence is both brutal and healing. It wounds, but it also heals the wound by forcing it into the light. The greatest leaders, the greatest sages, have all understood this power. They did not speak more than necessary. They chose their words with care, allowing silence to do most of the work. When they did speak, their words carried the weight of 1,000 silences. This is the secret of true influence. It is not in the noise, but in the quiet authority that arises from inner stillness. Silence, when fully embraced, becomes an inner landscape, as vast and alive as the world outside. Within this landscape are valleys of memory, mountains of archetypal truth, and rivers of intuition that flow quietly, unceasingly, beneath the surface of your conscious mind. To sit in silence is to wander through this inner terrain, to meet yourself, not as a persona, not as a role, but as a totality of your being. It is a homecoming, a return to the core of who you are. This is why silence is often feared more than conflict. Conflict is familiar, it is loud and dramatic, and in its chaos, you can still cling to the illusion of control. Silence, however, offers no such comfort. It holds up a mirror, so clean and so still that you can see every crack, every shadow, every part of yourself you have tried to avoid, and yet, once you surrender to it, once you stop resisting, silence ceases to be an enemy. It becomes a teacher whose lessons are both merciless and loving. It will strip away your lies, but only so that you can stand in the raw light of truth. Consider how silence transforms when it is intentional. There is a world of difference between the silence of avoidance and the silence of mastery. The first is hollow, filled with resentment or fear, a silence that hides. The second is full, powerful, and radiant. It does not hide. It reveals when you choose not to speak, not out of weakness but out of strength. Your silence carries a vibration that others feel even if they cannot name it. It is the vibration of someone who has become aligned with something larger than their own ego. Silence can also be the ultimate act of compassion. When someone is suffering, when they are pouring their heart out, the most powerful thing you can offer is not advice, not solutions, but silence, deep, attentive, presence-filled silence. In that silence, they feel seen. They feel that their pain is held without judgment. Words, no matter how kind, often feel like intrusions in such moments. But silence, true silence, becomes a container for healing. It says, I am here with you fully, and I do not need to fix you because you are not broken. On the other hand, silence can be brutal when it exposes what is false. If you have ever been in a conversation where someone simply refuses to engage in the game of false politeness, you know, the power of silence. It makes lies crumble. It leaves no room for pretense. This is why silence can end toxic relationships faster than confrontation. Words invite argument. But silence dénie it. Silence does not negotiate with what is false. It simply withdraws energy from it. And without that energy, falsehood withers and dies. There is also a cosmic dimension to silence when you sit quietly and close your eyes. The noise of the world fades. Beneath the surface of your thoughts, there is a deeper silence, a silence that feels infinite, as if it has always been there and always will be. This silence is not personal. It does not belong to you. You belong to it. It is the silence from which all creation arises and to which all things return. When you touch this silence, even for a moment, your life changes. You see that most of what you chase, most of what you fear is just noise, just shadows on the surface. The real substance of life is found in the quiet, in the stillness where the soul breathes. In my own life, I have discovered that silence is not something you practice once and master forever. It is a relationship. It is something you return to again and again, like a sacred well. Sometimes the water is still and you drink deeply. Other times the surface is disturbed, rippling with the storms of your mind. But no matter what, the well is always there, waiting for you to return. Silence is not about eliminating all thought or emotion. It is about learning to sit with them without being consumed. It is about becoming the witness, the one who observes without judgment, without needing to control. Silence also teaches you the value of words. When you live in constant noise, words lose their meaning. They become cheap, thrown around carelessly. But when you cultivate silence, you begin to see that words are powerful tools, not to be used lightly. You learn to speak less, but when you do speak, your words carry depth. They come from a place of stillness, and therefore they resonate. In this way, silence and speech are not opposites, but partners. Silence gives birth to true speech. Just as night gives birth to the dawn, if you want to wield silence as a weapon in your own life, start by turning inward. Spend time each day sitting in silence, even if only for a few minutes. Watch what arises. Feel the discomfort. Notice the urge to reach for distraction, and then do nothing. Let the silence work on you. It will feel brutal at first, like standing naked before the truth of who you are. But over time, you will discover that this silence is your greatest ally. It will teach you patience. It will teach you strength. And it will teach you that most battles are not won by shouting, but by refusing to fight at all. Silence is the language of the soul. It is the only language that can bridge the gap between the conscious and the unconscious, between the individual and the divine. When you sit in silence, you are not alone. You are surrounded by the whispers of ancestors, by the voices of the collective unconscious, by the presence of the self, the eternal, unchanging center of your being. Silence reconnects you to this center. It reminds you that beneath all the noise of life, there is a stillness that cannot be shaken. In moments of deep silence, something extraordinary happens. You begin to feel the boundaries of the self dissolve. The I that you cling to, the one defined by your name, your history, your roles fades away. What remains is not a void, but a fullness, a sense of being connected to everything. This is the silence that mystics speak of. The silence that is not empty but overflowing with life. It is in this silence that you realize that you are not separate from the universe, but an expression of it. You are the silence itself, dreaming itself into form. And so I return to the question, why is silence the most brutal weapon you will ever use? Because it is the one weapon that does not fight, does not destroy, and yet it conquers. Everything falls. It conquers illusion by refusing to feed it. It conquers chaos by refusing to join it. It conquers fear by revealing it for what it truly is, just noise, silence. When mastered, does not harm, but it transforms. It is not a weapon meant to wound, but a force that clears the field, making space for what is true and real to emerge in your own life. Consider where silence might serve you. Where have you been wasting energy on words that do not matter? Arguments that cannot be won, battles that lead nowhere. What would happen if you simply stopped speaking, not out of defeat, but out of strength? What would happen if you chose to let silence do the work for you? You might be surprised at the clarity that arises, the peace that settles in, and the power you feel when you are no longer caught in the endless cycle of reaction. In the end, silence is not about withdrawing from life, but about living more fully. It is about cutting through the noise so that you can hear the deeper music of existence. It is about remembering that you are not your words, not your roles, not even your thoughts. You are the stillness beneath it all. And when you live from that stillness, everything changes. You no longer need to shout to be heard. You no longer need to prove your worth. You simply are, and that is enough. So sit with your silence. Hold it like a sacred fire. Let it burn away the illusions. Let it reveal the truth. And when you finally speak, let your words emerge from that silence, sharp and clear as a blade, carrying the weight of all that is unspoken. That is the true power of silence, the power to cut through the false and reveal the eternal